In the 1970s, in the rainforest around Springbrook, in the mountains behind the Gold Coast in Queensland, a national parks ranger was moving through the bush after dark. The first thing that reached him, according to the account he later gave, was not a sound, but a smell. A thick, overpowering stench, rank and animal, that stopped him where he stood. Then something moved in the scrub ahead of him. Not a wallaby, not a feral pig. Something tall. By his description, 7 or 8 feet. Covered in dark hair, standing upright, watching him. It held there for a moment, and then it was gone into the forest, and the ranger was left in the dark with his heart hammering and a story he would spend a long time deciding whether to tell. He did tell it. And here is the thing that turns a campfire tale into something worth an episode. He was not the first, and he would be far from the last. Because for as long as there have been people in this country, not 200 years, but tens of thousands, there have been accounts of a tall, hair-covered, upright creature in the deep forests and ranges of eastern Australia. The settlers called it the Yahoo, and later the Yowie, but it already had 100 older names before any European ever set foot here. This is Ancient Aussie History, where we go looking for the parts of this country most people never find, and the ancient story most of us were never taught in school. Subscribe now, and if you'd rather listen, every episode is also a podcast on Spotify, link below. And leave a comment telling me whether you've ever heard something in the Australian bush at night that you couldn't explain. Because by the end of this, I don't think the Yowie is quite as easy to laugh off as most people assume. The names that came before the settlers. Let's be clear about one thing up front, because it is the single most important fact in this entire story, and the one most people have never heard. The Yowie is not a colonial invention. It was not dreamed up by bored settlers or borrowed from American Bigfoot movies. The tall, hairy man of the forests appears in Aboriginal tradition right across eastern Australia, under a great many different names, long. Thousands of years before the first fleet ever arrived. And the names are the key. In parts of Queensland, it appears as the Quinkin or the Joogabinna. Across New South Wales, it goes by Jurrawarra, Doolagahl, Thoolagarl, Gindaring, Mingawin, Putakan, Gulaga. The Gundungurra people of the Blue Mountains knew the Jurrawarra. The Kamilaroi knew the Doolagahl. In some traditions, it is simply the Doolagahl, which translates, plainly and chillingly, as Great Hairy Man. Different word, different language, over and over, describing the same thing. A large, upright, hair-covered being that lived in the ranges and the thick scrub, that was to be given a wide berth, and that was treated as a real and serious presence on the land. In some traditions, it was dangerous, something that took the unwary. In others, it was closer to a guardian or protector of certain places. But across all of them, it was treated not as a bogeyman for frightening children, but as an actual inhabitant of the country. As real and as worth respecting as any dangerous animal you might genuinely meet. Now hold that against the map. These were not one people telling one story. They were dozens of separate language groups, spread across an enormous stretch of the continent, many of them with no contact with one another, as culturally and linguistically distant from each other as nations on opposite sides of Europe. And independently, in their own words, they described the same creature. That is exactly the pattern we saw with the bunyip. Separate, disconnected communities, no shared source, all landing on the same figure. Coincidence can explain one story. It struggles very hard to explain the same story told in a dozen unrelated languages across half a continent. And it was not only spoken. Across parts of Australia, in rock art and rock shelters, there are painted and engraved figures. Tall, upright, robust, sometimes exaggerated in size, that some researchers and traditional owners connect to these hairy man traditions. In the sandstone country of Queensland, the Quinkin figures, painted on shelter walls and dated by archaeologists to thousands of years old, are among the most striking rock art in the country. Whatever each individual figure was meant to represent, and interpretation is genuinely contested, the broader point stands. The tradition of tall, powerful, non-human beings in the landscape was old enough and important enough to be recorded on stone. This was not a passing bit of folklore. It was a fixture of how people understood the country they lived in. Could a memory really last that long? If you've made it this far, here's the part that ties it all together. And it's the objection you're probably already forming. How could any tradition possibly stay accurate across thousands of years? Subscribe now if you want more of this series, because the answer is one this channel has covered before, and it changes how you have to weigh everything that follows. We know, now, that Aboriginal oral tradition is capable of carrying accurate information across almost unimaginable spans of time. The clearest proof is at Budj Bim in Victoria, where a volcanic eruption has been geologically dated to roughly 37,000 years ago. And the Gunditjmara people's tradition describes that eruption, in detail, in a way researchers have matched against the geological record. 37,000 years. Coastal traditions elsewhere preserve the drowning of shorelines at the end of the last ice age, accurate enough to map onto the real submerged coast. These are not vague stories. They are rigorously maintained records, held under strict law across hundreds of generations, and they have been formally verified by peer-reviewed science. So put the objection the right way round. If an oral tradition can carry an accurate memory of a volcanic eruption for 37,000 years, then carrying a description of a large animal that lived in the same forests is not a harder task. It is an easier one, which does not, on its own, prove the Yowie is real. But it does mean that when Aboriginal people say they have always known of a hairy man in the ranges, that statement carries a weight the skeptics have generally refused to give it. The colonial record. When Europeans arrived, they did not invent the creature. They collided with a belief that was already everywhere, and, tellingly, they started reporting it themselves. Throughout the 19th century, the pages of colonial newspapers were, in the words of one writer, haunted by the Yahoo, or the hairy man. Settlers reached for the only words they had: Australian apes, Yahoos, Yories. The reports are specific, and they are scattered in a way that is hard to wave away. In 1882, a man named Henry James McCooey gave a detailed account of what he called an indigenous ape he had watched in the bush on the south coast of New South Wales near the Braidwood district, describing its size, its dark hair, and its movements at length. In August of 1886, the Queanbeyan Age carried a report of a hairy human form, about 7 feet in height, walking in the bush. Through the 1880s and 1890s and into the new century, similar accounts surfaced from settler families and lone travellers across New South Wales and Queensland. Different districts, different decades, different people who had never met, describing the same tall, dark, upright, hair-covered figure. And this is the same argument that the bunyip forces on you. These accounts are spread so widely across geography and across time that a coordinated hoax becomes very difficult to argue. There was no internet, no shared script, often no easy way for a farmer in one valley to even know what a farmer 3 ranges over had reported. Some individual accounts were surely exaggerated, and some were surely invented. But the sheer consistency of the core description, appearing again and again from people with no way to compare notes, is not what fabrication usually looks like. The modern flap. The reports did not stop when the frontier closed. They continued straight into living memory, and one place in particular became their epicenter. Through the 1970s, along the rugged border country between Queensland and New South Wales, and around Springbrook especially, there was a genuine cluster of sightings, what researchers of these things call a flap, a run of encounters, over months, reported independently by different people in the same general area. And the witnesses were not who the stereotype would have you expect. Among them were national parks rangers, long-term local residents, and bushwalkers. People who knew that country intimately, who could tell a wallaby from a wombat from a feral dog at a glance, and who had nothing obvious to gain from claiming to have seen a monster. Alongside the sightings came the recurring physical details that show up in these accounts worldwide. Large human-like footprints, branches snapped off well above head height, 8 or 10 feet up, and that same overpowering stench, again and again. This is the William Buckley principle we talked about with the bunyip. Buckley was the escaped convict who survived 32 years living with the Wathaurong, and when he described a large creature at an inland lake, he described it with the same careful, survival-trained attention he brought to everything else, because misreading the bush could kill you. The credible Yowie witnesses sit in that same category. These are, by and large, not tourists chasing a thrill. They are people who read the landscape for a living, describing something that did not fit anything they knew. And that matters, because their baseline for what belongs in that forest is far higher than yours or mine. The Blue Mountains, west of Sydney, are the other great corridor, and there the reports have never really stopped. Accounts still surface today from hikers and campers, and the description stays stubbornly consistent across the decades. 6 to 8 feet tall, dark or reddish hair, a broad ape-like face, deep-set, piercing eyes, and that unmistakable, overwhelming odor. Consistency across a century and a half, from people who mostly have no idea what anyone else reported, is the thread that runs through this entire story. The fossil question, and where honesty demands caution. So what could it be? This is where cryptozoology gets excited, and where this channel is going to slow down and be careful, because the honest answer here is more complicated than the confident one. The most popular theory reaches for Gigantopithecus, a genuinely real, genuinely enormous extinct ape standing perhaps 3 meters tall that lived in what is now China and Southeast Asia. The appeal is obvious. A giant upright ape. In Asia, not so very far away. A second theory points to Homo erectus, an upright human relative that survived in Southeast Asia for an extraordinarily long time and whose build broadly matches the descriptions. But here I have to be straight with you, because the difference between the Yowie and the bunyip matters enormously. The bunyip has a serious, published scientific hypothesis behind it. The idea that it preserves a memory of real megafauna like Diprotodon, animals we know for certain lived alongside people here. The Yowie's fossil theories do not have that footing. There is no fossil evidence of Gigantopithecus or of Homo erectus anywhere in Australia. And there is a very hard geological reason to doubt the whole premise. Australia was never joined to Asia by a land bridge. The deep water of what's called the Wallace Line always separated the two. It is exactly why Australia has kangaroos and koalas and almost no native placental land mammals at all. A giant Asian ape could not simply have walked here. The first humans themselves had to cross open sea by boat to reach this continent around 65,000 years ago. So the surviving Asian ape idea runs straight into the ocean, and it does not have an answer. And that is the honest turn this story requires, the same one the bunyip demanded. The argument is not, and should not be, that a population of Gigantopithecus is alive right now in the Blue Mountains. The evidence does not carry us anywhere near there, and anyone who tells you it does is selling something. The interesting claim is narrower and sturdier. That Aboriginal tradition describes, consistently and across a vast area, a large creature of the forests. And that a tradition with a proven track record of preserving real events deserves to be taken seriously as a record of something, even if we cannot yet say what. The thylacine is the cautionary parallel worth keeping in mind. An animal officially declared extinct, insisted by many to be gone. And yet it clung on far longer than the tidy record allowed, and people who knew the bush kept reporting it for decades after science had closed the book. Believed extinct and actually gone are not the same sentence. The thylacine teaches humility. It does not, however, prove a giant ape. And it would be dishonest to pretend it does. What actually remains? So let's be fair and lay out the ordinary explanations, because most Yowie reports almost certainly have one. A kangaroo or a large wallaby standing upright at dusk, at a distance, in poor light, can look startlingly human-like and startlingly big, feral people. Hermits, the occasional person living rough and unwashed in remote country, could account for a share of the more solid, close-range encounters. And hoaxes are real. Some footprints and some photographs have been demonstrated to be fabricated, and the Yowie, like Bigfoot, attracts them. A septic can account for a great deal of this file, and a septic is right to try. But when you have done all of that honest subtracting, something is still left over that the tidy explanations struggle to reach. The Aboriginal tradition predates all of it. The newspapers, the hoaxes, the Bigfoot films, by thousands of years. Multiple disconnected language groups with no way to coordinate describe the same creature in their own words. The colonial and modern record then repeats that same description, consistently, across more than 150 years, from people who often had no way to know what anyone else had said, and the country it is reported from. The rainforests of the Queensland border ranges, the vast folded wilderness of the Blue Mountains, includes some of the least surveyed large fauna habitat in the settled world. We have not remotely looked hard enough to say with confidence what is and isn't in there. None of that is proof of a living creature, and this channel is not going to pretend it is. By every scientific measure, there is no verified Yowie. No body, no bone, no specimen that has ever survived examination. The most likely truth is that the Yowie is a cultural memory and a pattern of misidentification, not a flesh and blood ape hiding in the ferns. But the deeper truth underneath it is real, and it is the part that actually matters. The colonial record did not create the Yowie. It found it already there, already named, already woven into a detailed body of knowledge about the forests of a continent that European science was only just beginning to encounter and has still barely finished mapping. Whatever walks, or once walked, or was only ever imagined to walk in those ranges, the people of this land were describing it long before anyone arrived to call it a legend. If this is the kind of unresolved Australian story you want more of, leave it in the comments. And subscribe to Ancient Aussie History for more of the strange, ancient, and unresolved corners of this country hiding in plain sight.